First of all, I'd like to open up the discussion with Gary Kamiya, beloved San Francisco author, writer, and amazing friend and collaborator of mine, now librettist on his resume, and Walter Riley, a civil rights attorney and activist. And we'll introduce our singers later when we start the performance. Gary, what's your memory about how we started working together on this project?
Well, Allison told me long ago when we first met 4 or 5 years ago that her great friend Jack Hirschman, who of course was an eminent poet, a poet laureate of San Francisco, kind of a legendary figure and a mentor to Allison, that he once, in his kind of voice of God, basso profundo, voice that cannot be ignored or defied, learned that Allison was distantly related to this remarkable figure named Elijah Parrish Lovejoy, who was an abolitionist preacher and editor who was savagely murdered by a pro-slavery mob in Alton, Illinois in 1837. And she mentioned to Jack her connection to Elijah Lovejoy, and he took this in, and then he said in that voice, "Allison, write the opera." Or words to that effect. I mean, it's like wrong.
And right, those of you in the library, of course, everyone here probably knows of the great Jack Hirschman's writing poetry, but also about his mentorship to many of us. And he kindly invited me to set music to poetry of his and Lawrence Ferlinghetti's, and I really took his charge, and I thought it was a very serendipitous thing that I had just been reading about Elijah Lovejoy and finding out that my family was related to he and his brother Owen, and they were major influences on America's movement towards the abolition of slavery. Elijah died 24 years before the Civil War, but Owen went on to work with John Quincy Adams, and of course Abraham Lincoln to pass the bill that would abolish slavery. He had a home in Illinois, not Alton, but he had a home that was a major harbor in the Underground Railroad, and he also, with his other brother, published a book about the life of Elijah P. Lovejoy. So this inspiration, of course, was great, but it was really important to me to find a piece of music, find a way of treating this music. I wasn't ready to write an opera, although the piece is operatic in scope. And I thought an oratorio is probably a great choice, but that word makes some of us kind of tighten up and think, oh no, an hour-long piece about a biblical story that might be might have 4 or 5 too many movements, or maybe an hour and a half too long. But Handel, of course, created the first official oratorio. Handel's Messiah is one of the most popular pieces in the repertoire, or if not popular, at least most frequently performed. And we all know the Handel Messiah, the Hallelujah chorus. But here's an amazing thing about the connection between opera and oratorio that I think is important to understand, and also informed my choice of music. First of all, Handel was a great opera composer who was immensely successful, enormously wealthy, until when he was living in London, the competition basically had his opera house company shut down through scandalous stories and actually through a political move. They basically sent him into bankruptcy. And while he was undergoing a near blindness, recovering from a stroke, and the potential of debtor's prison, he decided that he would write a piece that would bring a lot of people in, that was inexpensive to produce, that didn't require all of the staging and all of the props and all of the expense of opera, and that would also be in the vernacular, in the language of the British, where he was a citizen. And he needed that to be a success, because that money from the proceeds went towards people who may or may not go to debtor's prison. So this was for him. And he borrowed from his opera an ode to Bacchus, the god of wine. And he changed the words to English, and that is now our famous hallelujah, hallelujah, cheers, hallelujah, hallelujah. That was part. So there is a strong connection between operatic style and oratorio. But oratorio still lends itself to sort of a sort of biblical or a sort of maybe an archaic quality. But Bradford Marsalis has written an oratorio. There are modern pieces that fuse many styles. His piece, Blood on the Fields, won the Pulitzer Prize. So I thought this is the way to go. We're going to do this. We can have narration. We can break some rules around telling the story through singing and have a narrative narrator. And this is the way we went about writing this. Starting with musical ideas, some operatic, some rhythmic that came from jazz, that came from American music. There was no rule around what style we were going to work in, or in which style I would compose. Because of my classical background and my experience with opera, I wanted there to be some good arias, which you'll hear from Michael and Melinda when she arrives. And then I wanted there to be some of that American language that's fused with classical. George Gershwin and Scott Joplin were composers I grew up playing out with Bach and with so many others. Bernstein and musical theater and opera and symphonic music. They all combine here in this music to create a sound for each movement and each place. So we found a lot of ways of working contemporary language too, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. How we branch, how we bridge between contemporary language and the language of Elijah Lovejoy.
Yeah, first I just want to say that I was so honored that Allison asked me to work on this libretto, and it was a complete reach for me. I like to think that I'm a creative writer of nonfiction, but I've never done this before. So that was an exciting challenge. And it was, I was thrilled because Allison and I are good friends and I know her music really well. And her versatility as a musician really appealed to me because I knew that she would be able to inhabit these different musical voices that she just talked about. There's many of them in this. And as I had to do the same thing in a certain way as a writer on this project. As Allison said, we sort of approached it without any particular creative rules. Sometimes I would say that in general, most singers and songwriters work with words first and then music, and I think we usually did that, but there were many cases where, like the very first song that I think you'll hear, The Call, which is one of the best songs in the piece, I think, Allison came, we were talking about it, this is the young Elijah Lovejoy is a 24-year-old devoutly religious young man who's walking all the way from his home in Maine to St. Louis, which is an incredibly long way to walk. And he's in agony of spirit because he was raised by devoutly religious parents, but God has not appeared to him. So he's walking along, and I was starting to write the lyrics about, oh God, why haven't you appeared to me? There's nothing except darkness, it's an empty sky. And then one day Allison comes up and goes, last night I started thinking about this rhythm, like step, step. And that became the first line, step, step, which is repeated over this kind of ostinato going on. And so that was just an example of, I'd written a lot of the verses already, but then we mixed that in. And that kind of fusion and collaboration we were able to do throughout. I mean, we worked together on a lot of the lyrics, and Allison had some really good ideas to delve more deeply than I had originally planned to into the writings of Lovejoy and also statements of his contemporaries and use them for lyrics of the songs. So, there's one song that comes from a very early poem of his, which is a very poignant poem about how he's kind of ready to die. and the only thing that's holding him here is his affections for some people on earth. Well, that ends up becoming incredibly relevant because this was one of the most poignant moments in the whole oratorio, is that Lovejoy essentially knew that they were going to kill him. I mean, he was an incredibly heroic man. And when in his climactic speech, not all of which we were able to get into the oratorio, of course, he talks about how the Apostle Paul says, followers of Christ should not have children, should not have families, because they have to be prepared to let them go, and that's the most painful thing. So we came up with these lines from this very, very youthful poem of Elijah Lovejoy, which is, the language is quite flowery and archaic, but it's very effective, and Allison said it's a really beautiful music. So yeah, we had a lot of, just a lot of really fascinating, fruitful, and fun, different types of collaboration on writing the lyrics, and that was really great fun for me, because as a creative person, when you get to do something new, there's nothing like it, and just as a writer, often you don't get to collaborate that much, so it's really fun. Something like this that's totally collaborative was really, really a joy.
I am just so lucky and honored to have Gary, one of my favorite writers in the city. Who's read Cold Gray City of Love? Here. Right, and Portals of the Past, and yeah, okay. So I've actually became friends with him when I played at an event, which was a roast for David Talbot, and we made friends instantly because I've been developing a show about the great women of San Francisco called The Best Bad Things, with my collaborator Candace Forrest, composer and collaborator and amazing human and friend. And we always focused on reading as much history as possible, and using as many words in the voice or in the written words that we could find for each character in our lyric writing. And we did a lot of that. And of course, it didn't always, you can't do it completely the whole time, otherwise you're kind of stuck in a sort of in that language, right? But I thought that was really interesting to do with Gary, because he always made sure that the line went somewhere. Even if I like the sound of it, or I really like the meaning of it, that we would stick to the narrative. He was, of course, being the great writer he is, able to keep me in check when I would just want to indulge in a really cool sounding line for no real reason other than I liked it.
But then I was thrilled when Allison wrote one song completely herself on Saturday afternoon, which I think you'll hear Bradley sing, and that was something that in some ways, I might not have been able to think of the form of it as a writer, because as a musician, Allison wrote the words, but she also wrote this very rollicking kind of 19th century jazzy, sort of almost cakewalk kind of a rhythm to that song, which really drives it. It's very light, and there's an incredible contrast between the lightness of the song. It's sung by this tragic figure, Francis McIntosh, a free African-American man who was hideously accused, wrongly accused, lashed out, unfortunately happened to stab the people that were trying to arrest him because he was scared he was going to be thrown in jail for 5 years for not doing anything, after which he was burned alive. And I wrote this rather elegiac prose poem that was originally going to be the lyrics of that song, and one day Allison came and said, I came up with this song from McIntosh, which is very light, and it was a great change. We kept my prose poem, and Walter reads it as a narration, but the lightness of McIntosh's joyous, I'm going to go see my gal, I just got off the boat, really created a very poignant contrast between the terrible fate that's about to befall you.
And because Elijah Lovejoy's character is so present, and he has most of the solo music, I wanted the other characters who were so essential to this story, to this interpretation or to our rendition of his story, to really have their own individual solo pieces, but also to have something relatable so that we can empathize, so that their characters would become real to us. And the inspiration for both the aria that Celia Lovejoy sings, the wife of Elijah, and Frances McIntosh came from continued research. I found articles about them and defending them. Why do we only know about the tragedy? Why don't we know them as real people? Why can't we give them a voice? Think about their loves, their hates, their life. And in all truth, this comes to play in a lot of media we read, and a lot of tragedies that happen in our time and in history. We want to give that person a real presence. It's not just giving them a song. Okay, that's part of the musical form, but it's really about recognizing their humanity. And so both of those songs were added pretty late in the picture, weren't they?
But we knew that we needed them, because one thing structurally about this story is it's quite narrow, and it's a one-way dark story. It's a young guy who is incredibly heroic. You've got a little bit of character development with him because he hasn't found God, and then he does, and he happens to find God when he listens to a fiery abolitionist preacher. So his conversion to Christianity and his hatred of slavery are fused together, which is very important. So it's an extraordinary tale, but it's very narrow, and so it was essential for this to even be an oratorio, let alone an opera, that we had these characters, that we had McIntosh as a full-blown, living, breathing human being, and Lovejoy's heroic, frail but incredibly heroic wife Celia needed to be a character. We need that just for this story to have some width and some not just unrelieved heroism and death. And then, but then the heroism and death part is where another one of, I think, our best parts in this piece is the very ending, because you've got this terrible thing. This guy knows he's going to be killed, and he is killed. And then we wrote this posthumous song for him when he appears back, as characters do in fiction, and says, "I lit a lamp and it went out. It was all for nothing. 24 years after I died, the nation tore itself apart, and we still haven't put it together again." So there's this very dark downturn, which the story needed. You can't, because we knew we wanted to end up. It has to end up. But before you go up, you have to go down. You have to actually go even more down in his death. And you have to have total despair. And only then, we wrote great lyrics, really inspiring. I don't want to sound self-congratulatory, but there's a feeling of sort of gospel transcendence and reaching out to the audience and drawing inspiration very much in the tradition of the African American church with the ending number. And so but that had to be earned. That churchian moment had to be earned. You can't just go straight into it. So that was a really important part of the piece.
And we were sketching out some of those ideas for the finale, for I Lit a Lamp, the tragic aria Elijah sings from the beyond after his murder. And the opening, we started sketching them out about 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And then we spent a little time during the lockdown in our small pod group or outside at your ranch, where we were writing away. And then I applied for the SF Arts Commission grant, which really gave me the opportunity to develop this further. And when Horace Steiner, the music director for the Colgate Symphony and Chorus, heard about it when I said I was applying for the grant, would you be open to premiering this? Not having heard a note of it, by the way, not having any idea what it was going to be like. And he said yes. I was really excited. And then when I got the grant, okay, I'm like, this is happening. We're all in. And we got very lucky to Walter Briley as our narrator. And I'd like to ask Walter just what you think about this process and about the subject and about being a narrator and getting your tux ready. Walter Riley's a great friend and of course an amazing person in our society who does amazing things, and I definitely have a lot of admiration for him. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm very excited to be involved in this, but I'm also excited just to know about this project and getting out to the public what happened to Lovejoy and what Lovejoy was fighting about and what Lovejoy wanted to be engaged with. And I'm excited about the Lovejoy story because I have been an organizer since I was an adolescent in North Carolina, where I grew up. And all of us descendants of slaves are aware of John Brown, and that we were not aware of Lovejoy. And it's particularly important to me that we raise him up, we lift up this struggle that occurred. So I became aware of it just when Allison asked me about it. I felt lucky. I don't know why she thought I could be the person, because I do organizing, I do speak a lot, but narration is very different. And I've never done it before, and I never sat on a panel with such artistic people. I sit on panels with people who talk about we have to make changes in the world around us, and sometimes we have to take risk as we do that. And we talk about specific needs. We talk about racism. We talk about what happened in the history of slavery in this country and what enslaved people have had to go through. And it was exciting to be aware of this project and be a part of it, to lift up this struggle and the horror that can beset a person who decides that they want to resist some very popular aspect of oppression and a repressive movement. And when people want to make change in a society that doesn't necessarily coincide with the needs of the folks with the most money, with the owners of property, and the people who decide the policies and the directions of government, that can be visited with terrible tragedies. And those tragedies last for families, and they last for generations that become part of us. But it's interesting to note that in this case, that there is some light that comes out of it. Allison, same last name, and I learned that she's met other members of the family and other people with the same name as Elijah Lovejoy. And I'm struck, by McIntosh, a young free man in the late 1820s, around the same time that Frederick Douglass was trying to wind his way out of enslavement. He got to Philadelphia, I believe, around 1830, Frederick Douglass did. And in that same period, Elijah Lovejoy was writing, railing against slavery and the nation that supported it and the people that maintained it. And he was doing it with his newspaper and probably in the school. I want to learn some more about it. But at this point, as a lawyer who was fighting as part of the social justice movement, as an organizer in labor and communities fighting for social justice, I find this right in line with what I do every day. And, I'm thankful to be involved.
Well, we're very, very grateful to have Walter be a part of it, and we've been having fun working on our, timing of the script, rehearsing with orchestra. Well, fun might not be the word, but we've been. What's interesting is that we are, in many ways, discussing the same things that you do with your panels, right? This is challenging so many ideas, some which are very contemporary, some which have been in a very, very horrible part of our history. And Gary and I discussed a few of them earlier today, and one, of course, is racial profiling, and the murder of George Floyd and how it parallels in some ways with the murder of McIntosh.
Yes, I just wanted to, you remind me, we'll hear the lines in here that he was arrested because he was standing there, he was there. I have had a lot of cases in the last few years of people who meet the profile and they're just standing there. And it's not even somebody that was a target when the cops arrived on the scene. They just happen to be there. And if they're black, particularly if they're a black male, dark skinned, you can expect violence. And that happens to be the truth in our society, in San Francisco, in Oakland, and all across the country. And I hope there's some understanding that this is not creative liberty in describing what happened to McIntosh.
No, not at all. No, this was very carefully thought about as to how we would relate this story, as well as the resistance that Elijah Lovejoy had for writing the truth, limitations on the press, first right amendments, which is why Jack Hirschman was so behind this. And now we're discussing this again, right?
I just wrote a piece that I put up on my Substack, Kamiya Unlimited, about an hour ago. It just shows not only the ongoing racial injustice parallels to the Elijah Lovejoy story, but as it was said, after he was murdered, he was a double martyr, because he was a martyr both to the abolitionist cause and the cause of racial justice, but he was also a martyr to the cause of free speech. And he died for his right that was guaranteed him by the U.S. Constitution to speak out on any subject whatsoever. And just last week, with this disgraceful decision by Jeff Bezos, the publisher of owner of the Washington Post, and Patrick Soon-Shiong, the owner of the Los Angeles Times, not to endorse in the presidential election with these threadbare excuses, which did not convince anyone that these weren't simply craven and self-interested moves. It's not exactly the same kind of free speech. No one's dying here, but it's really important, and these are very disturbing actions, even if, as we accept, maybe newspaper endorsements aren't moving massive numbers of people. Newspapers don't have the same pull they used to, but it's the principle. It's the principle that a newspaper is allowed to express an opinion on something, and that we assume that that opinion is being made in good faith and in good journalistic rigor. Bezos wrote, well, there's a perception of bias if you have an opinion. It's like, well, in that case, you can't say anything. You can't say, I don't think the Germans should have voted for the Nazis in the early 1930s because somebody's going to say you're biased. It's absurd. So the continuing resonance of the free speech part of this story, as well as the racial Lovejoy's courageous stand for racial justice, continues to this day, and it makes the story, I think, very resonant.
Yes. And on that note, we had just changed hopefully the last edit we'll make before the performance on Sunday. Michael has been, we'll see. It was supposed to change. There was a line that Gary caught in rehearsal that Michael and I had decided for the climactic recitative where Elijah Lovejoy gets shot. And Gary's like, well, we're already saying in the narrative, we don't want to give it away. And it was a good moment to say, my God, I am shot, which is this last thing he says. But Gary said, no, that's not going to work. So I searched for quotes by Elijah that would resonate and that would also maybe give a little bit of a light towards, or maybe give us a premonition or hopefulness even at his death. And the line is something he published about the press. He said, the truth shall prevail. Right, and so that ends up being his final line, and that's fresh off the press. Well, not he wrote it, we had it, and that's how these things are. In rehearsal, in arranging with my fantastic arranger and friend Ray Stevens, We've spent hours and hours on the phone and countless months of arranging choral parts, and well, I did the choral writing and all the melodic writing, but he helped me with the orchestrations, and it couldn't be done without this great team. Bradley has amazing suggestions. Melinda, would you like to please join us? We're about to start the musical aspect, and I'm going to introduce our wonderful singers. Gary, just a great collaborator and friend. We're so excited for this performance, and just in case any of you leave, I want you to know that you can buy your tickets online at the city box office and get 50% off with the code word orchestra. So don't let the idea of a symphony prohibit you from going to live concerts, because this is one of the coolest symphonies you'll ever go to. And they do programming that invites different communities, that premieres pieces around great stories, and that has eclectic music. And it's like this big family that also has just an incredible group of musicians.
And does Messiah.
And they do the yearly Messiah.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
Sing it yourself.
That's right, Dan. I've heard you were a soloist.
I am. Yes,
Yeah.
Bradley sung solos with them.
I have heard you go well. So
It's like a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage. Anyway, I do actually have one movement in this piece in which part of the choral writing is an homage to the Handel's Messiah. Although I can't consider myself a Baroque composer anywhere. Anyway, I'd like to introduce the wonderful singers and just thank you again for being here, and thanks for having us. And we're going to do some music for you and give you a little of the narration and give you a taste of this, but not enough, so that you'll. Besides, just imagine this is for a 60-person orchestra and a 75-person chorus with all of us. Hi, this is Melinda Martinez Becker. She'll be playing the role of Celia Ann Lovejoy, wife of the legend. This is Michael Desnoyers. Michael Tenor playing the role of Elijah Lovejoy has been a great help in helping me doctor up the parts and make adjustments that really work for a wonderful tenor like you. And of course, Bradley Kynard. He is sort of a twofold character, the voice of Francis McIntosh, as well as the voice of the spirit that connects us all, sort of the voice of wisdom that sort of speaks to us after the story at the end, with the spiritual that I wrote, which is sort of the major part of the finale. Write the ending first, and then you'll know how to end the story. Right? We're going to do a few excerpts. The opening piece, the call, and the call. That can mean many things, all right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a religious call in this case, the main meaning, but of course it presages his call to social justice. So it's a double call.
Right. And that rhythm we talk about is also a syncopated rhythm, and the choir spends its melodic time and a lot of harmonies based on the major minor pool. That's something we find in blues scales, blues music. And the modes that I use come from different jazz and classical and folk traditions. But we have this minor major, which becomes the whole. It's the key chord to the whole piece. So you're hearing this minor major pull all the time. And so even if it sounds like a classical piece, a lot of that's the essence of the music. And so anyway, we have this call, the chorus is singing, Elijah, what are you gonna do? Hear me calling you.
Shadows, clouds, and darkness are all that I see. Is there no heaven or just
choir urges him forward. Thank you. And the shadows, clouds, and darkness predict what he's going to see next, but the choir urges him to go forward to his destiny, to his fate. And that he does. And he lands in St. Louis, Missouri. And what year was this?
He gets to St. Louis in 1827, I think. And he discovers, he gets to St. Louis in 1827, and when he arrives there, he's shocked because St. Louis is basically the end of the United States at that time. It's a brawling frontier town filled with whoring, gambling, sinning of all kinds, and he's an extremely sheltered, idealistic, intellectual young man. And so when he gets there, eventually he opens a newspaper and he begins inveighing against the rampant sinning that he sees here. He does not yet say anything about slavery. That's too hot a subject to handle, and it isn't something that really seems to have crossed his radar screen yet. He may have disapproved of it, but he wasn't at that point going to start talking about it in his press. So that sets up the next song.
Right, and I'm not going to play the entire thing because it's primarily for chorus and orchestra, but I'll give you a taste of how I perceive this fire and brimstone sort of point of view. And he also called on people for right action, and also was really dismayed. In this piece, he expresses his dismay at their greed and capitalism, which of course the slave trade was a big part of the St. Louis culture and economics. And so he saw these horrific things, and he was already calling out people's immorality. But he was it's a bit of the fire and brimstone, and you can hear some of the inspiration of Verdi's Requiem or some sort of 20th century, early 20th century music of Stravinsky even. It's meant to be scary. City of sin, etc. It's not easy to sing, and it's also meant to be just a dramatic piece that sets up this.
And it has the chorus in this kind of contrapuntal fashion. The chorus fires back. The chorus kind of goes back and forth in the oratorio. Sometimes it's every man, and sometimes it's the bad guys. In this case, it's like they yell out, we're men of the West, we work hard and play hard, and no preacher's son from Maine is going to tell us what to do. So it introduces the conflict that is going to grow to a terrible crescendo throughout the piece.
Right, and I think it's important for us to understand this conflict, and he's built a school, right? He becomes some sort of a part of society, but I think he's really the choir is typically the voice of the people, right? And our choir switches points of view from time to time, especially when we need the really lawless men, or someone named lawless we need a sort of a persona. We use part of the chorus, and it's often the men, sorry, to use low tones to express these really awful things. Then,
and then do you want to do some of the grace? Or just basically at this point, this pivotal moment happens that I referred to earlier, where Elijah Lovejoy hears this famous abolitionist preacher named David Nelson, who thunders that in the eyes of God, slavery is as great a sin as murder. And Lovejoy, this pierces his soul. He converts on the spot. And from that day forward, he began slowly and cautiously at first to begin to editorialize and speak out against slavery. We were originally going to write some lyrics about his embracing of God and how it gave him this inner peace, but we ultimately decided to just have it be a wordless hymn. Right. So I'm bummed about that, but
next edition. We'll have a real conversion live on stage in front of the audience. And I did musically was I took the spiritual from the ending, actually, the piece which we call Come to the Valley, the piece that I wrote as a sort of the salve, or sort of the hopeful melody, the spiritual at the end, and I turned it into a Presbyterian hymn. So I took out all the aspects that made it sound like a spiritual, and I tried to straighten it out and square it up and make it sound like a Presbyterian hymn. So the choir is singing which is a spirit, which inclines to spiritual catharsis, or right. Anyway, to be continued. Anyway, so that's the hymn where he's converted, but his Christianity is also really focused on really he speaks to more of it, I think his morality of what's happening in the
Right. Yeah, and gives him this incredible inner strength. I mean, it was apparently an incredibly deep conversion, and it just put iron in his spine for his entire life, right up to, he died at age 34, so it was only a few more years, and he never wavered, right, even knowing at the very end that he was going to be killed probably within days. This religious conversion stayed with him. So after this, we then go into narration. This begins the conflict where he starts speaking out against slavery.
Right, and we'll first start with the piece sung by the character Francis McIntosh called Saturday Afternoon, sung by Bradley Kynard.
Saturday afternoon, going to see my girl soon, with my new red coat and my shiny shoes. I'll wash off my hands and these Mississippi blues. Saturday, noon, going to see my girl soon. When the floral lands, I'll get ready to dance. Going to put my hat on and get on the shassoon. I don't like trouble, I don't care for strife, or those who stir up anger, hate and the like, who make a fuss of something that don't amount to nothing after too much whiskey and a blown up bride. Saturday, noon, going to see my girl soon. When the floral lands, I'll get ready to dance. Going to put my hat on and get on the shassoon. Don't give me trouble, 'cause I'm not like you. Don't tell me you've got nothing better to do. No matter what you make of it, I'm gonna walk away from it, keep to my own and live life in peace. Saturday afternoon, going to see my girl soon. Just let me be. Just let me be. Leave me in peace. Just let me be.
Francis McIntosh walked off the steamboat Florida, a free man in a red coat going to see his girl. A fight broke out on the docks. The police came rushing in. They arrested McIntosh because he was black and happened to be standing there. "5 years, they said. You'll get 5 years in jail." He lost his head. He drew a knife. He stabbed a man and tried to flee, but there was no escape. A mob appeared, 500 strong, and smashed into his cell. Strong arms of hate seized McIntosh and carried him outside. They chained him to a locust tree and piled up stacks of wood. They lit a match and watched in glee as flames began to mount. "Please shoot me," McIntosh begged the crowd, but no one raised a hand. He sang old hymns and prayed to God as flames grew ever higher. 2,000 watched that Saturday as Francis McIntosh burned to death in agony under the Missouri sky.
Can you not feel my pain? Does my blood not flow like yours? They tied me up and burned me. Is there no justice?
It has entered my soul. I will not turn back. The river is wide and deep, but I cannot forsake my post. The cry of the oppressed has entered unto my ears and unto my soul, so that while I live, I can never hold my peace. I will not hold my tongue. I fear God more than I fear man. I am one and you are many. With the Lord's help, I will not turn my back. Truth in all of its severity, I condemn this savage barbarity, a call for all future generations, freedom and justice for all.
choir, and
Yes.
that was wonderful. Thank you. Michael just really makes this come alive. And after this, the chorus comes in, and everyone says, "This has entered my soul," to quote him exactly. It has entered my soul, I will not turn back. And he is committed from this point on, and writes in the paper an article which stirs up a lot of trouble. And this article is in boldface: awful murder and savage barbarity. And he calls out the people who committed this crime, the hundreds of people who were there.
And this is when he encounters the appropriately named Judge Lawless. And Judge Lawless rules on the murder of McIntosh that it is beyond the reach of human law, because it was a mob, and the mob had its own force, and nothing can be done, and no one should be arrested. So then we have a song where, it goes back and forth between Elijah singing, awful murder and savage barbarity, and the chorus saying it's beyond the male chorus, the bad guys, saying it's beyond the reach of human law. The mob shall be acquitted, and it ends with Elijah, saying, "I cannot believe that justice would be so abused."
And I can hear him saying that today,
Right.
again.
Yeah. Right. And then we have Celia's moment.
Right. Celia Lovejoy was about 10 or so years younger, 15 years younger than Elijah. They already had one child, and she was pregnant with a second when mobs of people would try to break into their house and drag Elijah away to tar feather him. They were throwing away their furniture, they were threatening to set the house on fire. It was a constant struggle just to exist, and very frightful. And so this is her answer to all of that, and which is really incredible, because when Elijah died, people said that she had a nervous breakdown and she didn't appear at his service. When she was pregnant with her, she lost her second child. She just lost her husband. She was unprotected in a society in a time when women had no rights or property ownership, and her family was disowned her because they were slave owners. So it wasn't, no wonder she did. But during their time together, she stood by him with all of her might. And here she reads a letter in which Elijah describes to her, maybe in not such a contemporarily acceptable way, how strong his wife is.
A perfect heroine, enduring affliction more calmly than I suppose possible for a woman.
And this was the right moment to pull in my love for Puccini and Verdi and late romantic opera, and just really soulful and beautiful singing and drama, of course.
So at this point, Elijah has had more than enough of the slave state of Missouri, of St. Louis, and he decides to move his house and his newspaper across the Mississippi River to Alton, Illinois, which incidentally is where Miles Davis was born. He's expecting when he gets to Alton that he's going to find freedom and freedom from the threats and the violence and the attacks and the constant destruction of his presses, but he's wrong. One thing that I realized researching this was that Southern Illinois was settled first, of course, by people coming out of the South, so they were slave owners, and the Southern Illinois, of which Alton is in Southern Illinois, was filled with vehemently pro-slavery citizens. And essentially, Lovejoy got the same reception in Alton that he had in St. Louis. And the mob, he refused to back down. He continued to inveigh vehemently against slavery, and the actions against him got stronger and stronger. And no less than 3 times. It's almost, this metaphor is so rich, and we actually need to talk about like crossing the river and the river being wide a lot in this oratorio, but they throw his printing press into the Mississippi River no less than 3 times. And he still continues to battle, and it now begins to move towards a very, very serious, the most serious climax, when his enemies pack a meeting that was supposed to be of an anti-slavery convention. They pack it with pro-slavery allies, making mockery of it, and pass a resolution led by the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, a man with the Dickensian name of Usher Linder. They pass a resolution saying that even though we're not saying anything personal against Mr. Lovejoy, he cannot continue to publish anything about slavery because it's too destructive of the peace and harmony of the community. And they basically, there's major threats against his life. So at this point, it now becomes clear that no officials are going to do anything to stop the assassination that is now being openly threatened. So then we have the song Endangering the Peace. I don't know if you want to do that one or...
I'll just give you a sample of it. The chorus mostly sings this, and where they're really urging Elijah to be quiet and not to get, it's not even urging, they're telling him he's banned from writing, and they sing, endangering the peace, endangering the peace, hold your tongue, pass over in silence, and he responds, you just say,
Oh, I'll sing it. This is 2029, so
yeah.
this is impromptu. I refuse. I will not forsake my post.
Yeah, you tell him. And so they continue to tell him, and it's always, of course, the lower male voices who are the hold their tongue. But anyway, it's an amazing. He knows he's being threatened.
Right, yeah, and he's, actually, there's a really dark line right after the song that Michael just sang, and the chorus. Attorney General Linder, the man who's the chief law enforcement officer of the state of Illinois, casually says to someone, Elijah Lovejoy will be killed within 2 weeks. He was actually wrong. He was killed in 4 days from then. And there's an incredible, this is in Walter's narration, one of Elijah's friends, another preacher named Beecher, says he never saw him be anything but incredibly calm and incredibly settled, but he had this poignant look on his face, and he thought that even then he was thinking about his son, who he wouldn't see anymore. So, but he was unfailingly calm, kind, and polite in these last few days. And do you want to do There Is an Isle?
Yes, yeah. Yes. And this is where we put in the duet There Is an Isle, which is based on earlier poetry of Elijah Lovejoy.
The one I mentioned before, that was a very early poem that has this remarkable resonance at this later time.
It does, as much as at the end it foreshadows his death, and most of it, there is this idyllic world and a sort of romantic ideal of this beautiful world, this isle of peace and joy, where even despair itself would smile. So I'd like to invite Melinda and Michael to give you a sample of this, what's more like an art song within the middle of all of this chaos.
There is an isle, a lovely isle, which ocean's depths embrace. Nor man's deceit, nor any wile hath ever found the place. How sweet would be if I could find that isle and leave the world behind.
Its silvery streams, where crystals flow, where sparkling diamonds beam, and sweetly murmuring gently go to meet a starless sea. And in their clear, reflective tide, in golden scales, the fishes glide.
10,000 naiads sport along her ever-joyous train, and life and love are poured in song and bliss in every strain. So soft, so sweet, so bland the while, that even despair itself would smile.
And there's more to that. And so after this calm and beautiful moment they have together,
We then go into the climax of the piece. A new printing press is delivered in the small hours of November 7th, 1837. Comes down the river. Elijah and his allies take it and place it in a warehouse by the river. But all that day, a mob, which has been thwarted because they expected the printing press to come later and they missed their chance, they gather in local taverns and begin drinking heavily. And that night, Elijah and his allies decide to stay in the warehouse, which is a heavy building, a heavy stone building, and they decide to stay there to guard the printing press. That night, the drunken mob assaults the warehouse. Gunshots are exchanged. One of the members of the mob is killed. This enrages them even more. They set fire to the roof. They run up, place a ladder against the building. They run up and set fire to it. Elijah Lovejoy rushes out, pushes over the ladder. They put the ladder back. They set fire to it again. This time, when he rushes out, two leading members of the community, doctors, both riflemen who are hiding behind a nearby woodpile, are prepared, take careful aim, and when Lovejoy rushes out to push over the ladder, fire, and he's hit 5 times. He says, "My God, I am shot," crawls back inside and dies. The people inside say, they've killed Elijah Lovejoy, at which there's this tremendous howl of glee and vindication and triumph from the mob. They storm in, just mute. They destroy everything inside. And the next day, Lovejoy has this tiny little funeral, tiny little service. His wife is too overcome, understandably, to attend. And that's when we move into the next song.
Right, but Michael and I have decided that we don't want to give away his last great aria in number 2, right?
Gotta come see the show.
That's right.
That's where all the high notes are.
And full orchestra,
Of course.
and of course it is called "I Lit a Lamp," and I think I wasn't aware of this when Gary offered that lyric and that line as a title for the elegy, sort of his aria that he sings posthumously. Is that "I Lit a Lamp" is lighting a lamp is a reference to many things, of course, as a leader, as someone who leads in society, or maybe as a religious leader, or as a teacher, or as someone who's inspiring. But in the Underground Railroad, lighting a lamp implied that you had a lamp in your window and that it was a safe house. So we learned that from one of our choir members, or you maybe knew that, but I wasn't.
I actually, when I wrote it, I didn't know that, so that's a great piece of
And then
serendipity.
there's the spiritual, keep your lamps trimmed and burning, which has to refer, at least in some way.
And right, and there are a lot of references that we use in here, like crossing the river, and Walter said something about the name Elijah itself. Before we go to the finale, you said something about the meaning of Elijah.
There's a woman, slave, there's a female slave, enslaved person named Elijah that escaped. And there's there's music. Run, Elijah, run. Elijah crosses the river. Elijah to freedom.
Interesting. Well, we are going to conclude the musical portion with the finale, the beginning of the finale. So you're not going to get the big gospel number at the end, but with the spiritual that is sung actually by all 3. And this is inspired by the music of, the arrangements of Henry T. Burleigh. Howard T. Burleigh was an assistant to Dvorak, and he was discovered singing. Antonin Dvorak was in the United States because of the overthrow of his country, Czechoslovakia at the time. And he was a folklorist, classical composer who loved folk music, and he heard Burleigh singing spirituals that he had learned by ear. And he was a trained musician, and he worked with Dvorak, and Dvorak incorporated his singing and some of that music into his famous Ninth Symphony, the New World Symphony. At least he thought this was the most important music in America, the spiritual. And so I didn't disclose this in the last talk, but as I've grown up, for some reason, I've just always known a lot of spirituals and sung them, maybe from choir when I was a kid. When my father died, we sang Swing Low. And they've been a big part. I've accompanied a lot of singers. It's just very meaningful to me. And it's the music I find myself singing when nothing else is going on, I'll sometimes find myself singing spiritual. So it's very, maybe not necessarily something that everyone was doing in my surroundings, but it's something that's really, really meaningful and influential to me. So this is Come to the Valley, a call to everyone to come together towards healing and moving forward. Gary and I are pretty excited about having our works and music, or his works and music, and libretto, and perform this weekend, premiere. And he's an amazing piece by this talented singers and orchestra.
Not for the last time.
Not for the last time.
Yes. Definitely will be done again sometime.
I have a
Question? Yes.
Gary, can you repeat the question into the mic?
Sure.
I'll ask it. Well, because we're recording.
Hey, I'm Anne. Tricky, actually.
Hi, Anne.
Okay, nice to see you, Allison. I'm from the Arts Commission, so we funded this grant. But I have a question. One of the things that kept coming up to me, especially with the number of times they threw this printing press in the river, like, they could have just not read the materials. You know, like nowadays people would just be like, unfollow, right? So like, was there not a lot of other things for them to read, or like what? Or was he just that
So the question is, why did they keep throwing his printing press into the river? You know, couldn't they just like not bother to read what he was writing? But they were, I mean, the answer is that they were so filled with rage at him and having the temerity to speak out against slavery that it was symbolic and practical. They were literally, you know, neutering him and removing the instrument of his communication and throwing it into the largest river in the country. And they did it again and again. So yes, they, you know, could have simply passed over, but this was incendiary hatred and that drove it.
In addition, sorry, before you finish.
No, go ahead.
In addition, there are people who had interests economically in slavery, even in the free state of Illinois. And there were people who were invested in the capital of it and didn't want that change. And that's something that we're seeing presently. It's because he was such a threat, and he was influencing a lot of the Christian believers, especially women. There was a huge movement that was already, there were more gatherings, thanks to David Nelson and Elijah Lovejoy. There were more abolitionist organizations gathering together. So he was building something already in his lifetime. And that's why I think the threat of people everyone read the paper then, right? There were a few papers, but so I think that may be even another aspect of the answer.
It's worth underscoring that his paper was being read in other parts of the country. So he was well known and throughout the abolitionist movement in other parts.
I might also point out cousin of mine was Delia Ann Webster, who was a noted abolitionist and liberal railroad operator. But she was slandered in newspapers all the time, and I'm sure the same thing happened with Lovejoy in his own time, that there were as many pro-slavery papers in Kentucky, in fact, far more than there were abolitionist newspapers. And so a lot of people were being incited probably as much by the slander and libel that were being leveled against them. And another cousin of mine, he had a newspaper, a mob from Kentucky, crossed over the Ohio River and threw his presses in the river. He escaped with his life, with his young family, but nonetheless, he was in Ohio. He wasn't even in Kentucky, and a mob crossed over the river to destroy his presses. So I think you have to understand that people could be incited by competing newspapers. You were just another voice as far as they were concerned. And they could silence you, then all they had to hear was an echo.
The comment is that there was tremendous incitement certainly in the pro-slavery states. There was, to be an abolitionist, to have any abolitionist sentiments in the press in a pro-slavery state was really extraordinary. Because even in the free states, the out-and-out abolitionists were regarded as really radical. So the gentleman's comment is that, there was so much incitement, so much hatred stirred up by the pro-slavery press, and it's extraordinary how little resistance there was to that, even in the North, and how deeply embedded the idea of not disturbing the South, even though people that did not agree with slavery, did not believe in it, were very hesitant to take it on. So that's a very eye-opening thing about this whole story is just how taboo a subject of slavery was even in the North.
Right, and what you said about the slander came to Elijah a lot. People called him a sanctimonious madman and a religious fanatic, which Walter says is often the case when people.
Whenever anybody decides to go against the main tenets of a particular system, they become demonized. And John Brown was called crazy, but it didn't seem crazy to me, and all of his conduct was very rational. And he was inspired by Elijah Lovejoy, and Elijah Lovejoy does not sing crazy or sanctimonious.
Sure.
He obviously was a man of God, but the men of God in power didn't preach the man the word of God.
Delia was a woman, of course, so there was a lot of sexual innuendo in the newspapers in Kentucky that was using her gender against her because she was an outspoken woman. And in Kentucky, women were expected to be demure. The men fancied themselves gentlemen, even if they enslaved other people and used them ruthlessly to the ends of their lives. And I think that she went through pretty much hell in her life. Even after the Civil War, people sort of disavowed all the stuff that she did, even though she went to prison several times. They, as far as they were concerned, it was over, everybody go home. And she worked for like women's rights and things like that, and also helped black children learn to read and write and use mathematics. And she died in like 1903 or 1904 at her niece's home in Iowa. I guess her niece was like the first woman professor in Iowa. Buried somewhere in Iowa. But anyways, there's a whole chest of letters that's missing. So if anybody sees where that test is, I know.
We will, and that's all of these stories have, are of interest here, and also there's so much history that we learned in this experience. And I think that's been in the research, which Gary, of course, is a great historian and researcher, and I've read.
And us too. The three performers, we're learning so much about this. And it's truly one of the joys of being a performer of a historical work like this is how much we get to learn and bring these characters and these historical figures to life. And I just want to say, Allison and Gary, how much I appreciate being part of this project, and for my own learning, but also for just being part of this.
Thank you all.